The known commodities have been stepping up so far for the Miami Hurricanes in spring football. But what about the surprises?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. The everydayers, we love you. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube, and we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around that next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. But we got an awesome question based on 2 weeks worth of spring football practices so far from James in the Pines, who's part of our Locked On Canes Insiders group. And he's saying, hey, I'm so glad, Donno, to hear you talk about the players that are looking good in spring football. But has anyone so far who's really been stepping up, players who have been a surprise to you? Because we talk about a lot of the known commodities like Cam Ward and Xavier Restrepo, who have been playing really well and making highlights just about every day in practice. So now, as far as, players who have been stepping up, surprising me so far, some of these are new guys, early enrollees, transfers, that kind of thing, players we haven't seen in orange and green before. But there are also some players who were on the team last year who I think are blossoming and I think can take it to the next level this season. But first guy I'll mention is one of those early enrollees. We've seen him out there looking really well, performing in spring, and coaches are singing his praises, and that's Bobby Pruitt, Bobby Pruitt, the early enrollee linebacker. That's a guy who's exceeding my expectations so far. Lance Guidry and Derek Nicholson, the linebackers coach, have been really complimentary of Bobby Pruitt. Another one that I want to throw his name out there because he's been shouted out a couple times. Early enrollee center, Nino Francavilla. I know that his recruitment was not all that heralded, and he actually flipped to Miami from an Ivy League school, so there wasn't a whole lot of hype for him. But Francavilla was someone who was specifically mentioned by transfer center Zach Carpenter, who's very experienced. He's going to be taking over from Matt Lee this year. He shouted out Francavilla as a guy who's out there doing well. Someone that I've definitely seen and heard from that's taken a big step so far in his development is Ja'Dais Richard at cornerback. This is someone who was here last year. Ja'Dais transferred in last year out of Vanderbilt and, played a little bit, did have some moments kind of later in the season, but he's been looking really well, taking a lot of first team reps in practice so far. And I can remember asking Daryl Porter earlier before spring started. Obviously, Daryl Porter, someone who is a known commodity who's playing well out there. Porter was Miami's top cover guy last year. He specifically mentioned Ja'Dais Richard as someone who was really standing out in the offseason workout programs and can take another step this year. So watch out for Ja'Dais Richard. I think that's someone who can make a big jump this season, in my opinion. And, Miami, obviously, they're going to have some important spots at defensive back. The cornerbacks, of course, safeties. You're replacing two safeties who are on their way to the NFL. So DB is going to be an important spot. Another one, and I know people are going to laugh or even cringe when I bring this up. I don't necessarily expect him to be a starter this year, but a guy who clearly practices well. And I think this has more to do than his family tree or his last name. But Louis Cristobal Jr. clearly practices well because he's earned a lot of prominent reps at left guard. Now, the guy who is really going to compete and push him there and maybe will ultimately win that starting left guard job is Samson Okunlola, who's also stepping up. So I wanted to mention both of them as players who I think are practicing well. Someone else who I think low-key is having a good spring so far is Thomas Gore. Excuse me, I had a frog in my throat there. Thomas Gore, who's in his second year at Miami, transferred in to play defensive line, transferred in from Georgia State last year. Didn't do a whole lot last year, was kind of quiet, but he's always somebody who seems to pop in practice. He's been getting a lot of prominent defensive tackle reps so far in spring. So Gore, who was another guy who was specifically shouted out by Jason Taylor when he talked about his defensive line yesterday. Now at tight end, here's one that, again, an early enrollee. We've given this guy his share of praise on the show the last couple weeks. This won't be the first time I bring up Elijah Lofton, but I wanted to bring up Elijah Lofton again because, again, I didn't know what to expect for a guy who's in his first semester. We don't talk about him, or didn't talk about him quite as much as Josiah Trader, who's also playing really well as a true freshman. But Elijah Lofton, who's just really been consistent. He's been making big plays every single practice, and you would never guess to watch number 9 out there that he's an early enrollee freshman at tight end. So I feel really good about as good as I could possibly feel about Miami's tight end group, heading through spring football, since that group was almost non-existent when it came to the passing game last year. Injuries had something to do with that, of course, with Elijah Arroyo not being available most of last year. But I think that tight end room is ready to take a step up, and Elijah Lofton is going to be a big part of that. He's been better than advertised, in my opinion. Someone else who I would say who's been better than advertised so far in spring football has been Carr, true freshman wide receiver, because, again, Josiah Trader's the one we were all talking about, but Carr, and Trader also has been fantastic, but Carr is making a ton of plays in one-on-one drills. He's always open. He's always got separation, right? And I don't know, he doesn't go up against a lot of first-string defensive backs. Maybe they should start putting starters up against this dude in practice, because he creates a lot of separation against the second and third stringers, that's for sure. And another one I'll shout out heading into his second year at Miami is Kaleb Spencer. He's someone who's actually moved from safety to now the star or nickel role, and Spencer has been practicing very well. And, for guys who are adapting or changing positions, a couple of other ones I'll throw out there. Actually, one of these we're going to talk about later, so I'll save it because we got a question about him. But another one is Robby Washington. Robby Washington, who's been moving around a lot this week in practice, of course, came into Miami as a wide receiver out of Palmetto High School. His twin brother, Bobby, is a linebacker on the team. But Robby on Tuesday practiced, from what I saw, pretty much exclusively at cornerback. And then on Thursday, he was playing both ways. He was getting reps at cornerback, getting reps at receiver. Mario Cristobal talked about his athleticism and his versatility. I wonder if we could see Robby, I should say, maybe playing either side of the football at certain points this year, because I'm not so sure if they're committed to switching him to defensive back, but it is something they've been experimenting with, and he's had good reps on both sides of the football. We get a question from 818 Callie Kane. And by the way, guys, the questions are coming in here from our Locked On Canes insiders. If you want to join free for 14 days, click the link in the show description below. Become a Locked On Canes insider. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours and vice versa. You can ask me one-on-one questions. I give you guys practice updates, recruiting scoops, show previews. Try it free for 14 days. Click that link below. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. There's a lot of added value on there when you become a Locked On Canes insider. So the question from 818, he says, hey, when are the summer enrollees planning on reporting to Miami? And also, are people forgetting about Chance Robinson? He says, I know he's not on campus yet, but people forget he has a lot of upside too, even though he can't attend spring practice. Also, will all the high schools be forced to allow scholarship players to graduate high school early at some point? There's a lot to unpack there, that question, 818. As far as summer enrollees, so the recruits who are not enrolled yet, I think there's like about 10 of them who are not here yet. They're going to be arriving in June officially to start classes and workouts to officially enroll at Miami, because yes, when they're not enrolled yet, they cannot participate in practices and workouts. I am, though, impressed that some of the early enrollees, whenever they have any spare time, they come down, they hang out, they watch practices, which I think is really cool, that these guys they're getting about as close to the program as they possibly can. But then in June, they're going to officially enroll. And from between June to late July to early August is when they're going to be able to go through the off-season workouts and get acclimated before fall camp. Fall camp usually starts either the last couple days of July or the first couple days of August. It'll probably start in July because Miami has an early opener this year, week 0, August 31st against Florida. So I would imagine late July is when we're going to see fall camp open for Miami, but the summer enrollees are going to be arriving in June. You mentioned Chance Robinson. Again, I agree with you. I think he's going to be a great one at Miami. He's got a good combination of size and abilities, about 6'2", probably around 200 pounds now at receiver. Was an excellent standout at a top-notch high school program. I mean, if you're a standout at St. Thomas Aquinas, you are prepared to play well at the next level. And I think this could end up being, just from a Miami standpoint, a historically good wide receiver class, having JoJo Trader, who I think is going to explode even this year as a true freshman, Carr, who's a guy who's exceeded my expectations so far, and then Robinson is going to arrive in the summer. So I think this has a chance to be just a dynamite class of 2024 in terms of wide receivers for Miami. You asked about early enrollees. So I think we're starting to see now more and more of the private high schools, because I think he brings that up because Chance Robinson cannot enroll early because St. Thomas will not let you graduate early. I feel like American Heritage has softened their stance on that, and others are no longer, requiring you to go through May or June or whatever it is. So, I don't know. I don't know if there's any way they can be forced to allow players to graduate early, and players need to get all their credits in by December of their senior year anyway, which not everybody can do. But I think we're seeing more and more high schools become lenient on that, to answer your question. We get a good one that I want to tackle on the other side about why Miami isn't fighting to get out of the ACC. We're seeing the ACC, they're being sued by Florida State. They're being sued by Florida State's having hearings today in court with the ACC. Prominent schools within the conference are trying to break that grant of rights, and they're trying to get out, where Miami is telling people we're happy right where we are. Why? And should they be fighting it? We have a lot coming up, guys. We also got a great question about who are the leaders on the team, because Miami's losing some important leaders to graduation in the NFL. So, folks, you want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. And I know you're keeping it locked to Manscaped. I'm so glad Manscaped is with us. This episode is brought to you by the spring cleaning champions, Manscaped. This season, make sure to groom your carpets and the drapes with the leaders in below-the-waist grooming. Clear out that winter bush with Manscaped's Lawnmower 5.0 and watch your confidence bloom like the springtime flowers. Embrace the season and join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with our special offer. Go to manscaped.com and use code LOCKEDON for 20% off plus free shipping. After using Manscaped, I can finally say I have caught the spring fever. Introducing the season's champ, the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. The 5th generation trimmer features 2 interchangeable next-gen skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. It also uses dual LED spotlights to guide you through the darkest winter debris. Navigate with confidence in your delicate areas. This thing was practically designed by NASA. This thing's amazing. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code LOCKEDON at manscaped.com. It's 20% off and free shipping with the code LOCKEDON at manscaped.com. Nothing like a little spring cleaning in your pants. My friends, we are also proudly brought to you by the official ticket service of Locked On Canes, and that's Game Time. I log on to that Game Time app. I'm on there pretty much every day looking for deals, and I'm finding deals, guys, whether you're booking in advance or especially the last-minute tickets. I know sometimes you think, oh, am I getting ripped off if I'm buying a ticket day before or day of event? Never at Game Time. You're always getting the best possible prices. I love the all-in prices. They don't try to slap you with those hidden fees at checkout. I love the fact that at Game Time, you get views directly from your seat, and that Game Time guarantee really makes all the difference. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. Whether you're looking for Miami Heat tickets, Florida Panthers tickets, Inter Miami, concerts, comedy shows, download that Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this Friday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we get a great question from Locked On Canes insider by the name of Big Canes fan. I love this dude. He says we need cornerback help and another running back at least. How many transfers can we take with the current spring numbers? He says. All right, so we know the roster limit. You don't have to be compliant with the roster limit until August. So the roster limit is 85 in terms of scholarships. Miami is, by my unofficial count, at 91. So give or take, because it's unofficial. So let's say Miami is 6 or 7 scholarships over the limit right now. And that includes Henry Parrish after him leaving at running back. But definitely after spring football, there are going to be players coming in. There's going to be a lot of players coming out, right? And, some players will choose to leave to find more playing time elsewhere, because by the time spring is over, you have a better idea where you stand. Am I a second stringer, third stringer? Am I not going to play? And so on. So there are definitely going to be players who decide to leave Miami. There will be players, and this happens everywhere, not just here, players who are going to get nudged out and, be encouraged to find opportunities elsewhere. And yes, there is some debate among running back if Miami really needs that or not, because I think Mark Fletcher is going to be ready in time for fall camp, which is huge, because that would mean he'd be ready to start against the Florida Gators at running back. He's Miami's best running back. However, in losing Henry Parrish, you lose a ton of experience and a guy with a very high floor. So does Miami want to try and, replace Parrish with another experienced running back? Because a lot of Miami's running backs are young and or injury prone. So I get it. Defensive back, absolutely. I get it. Would Miami still look potentially at defensive line? We've heard Romello Height at edge as being a guy Miami might look at, a veteran who, spurned Miami, 5 years ago on National Signing Day to go to Auburn instead. Would they bring him here? Don't worry. Like the roster right now, Miami is definitely over the scholarship limit. There's going to be some players departing in April. April 15th is when the portal opens again. There are going to be spots open. Not many, though. You're talking about maybe adding 3-4 guys in the portal because you're not going to be able to create unlimited spots, but you are going to be able to create a few spots there, in my humble opinion. We get a question from Nick, who says, okay, Donno, here's the question. He says, is it malpractice for the Miami Hurricanes administration to sit on their hands and whistle in the dark as if the ACC is a decent opportunity, he says? Or do they see the writing on the wall and realize that there's no way out of the grant of rights and are getting ahead of the inevitable, he says? Now, obviously, Florida State and Clemson, they're fighting. Florida State's been fighting tooth and nail for a couple of months. Clemson just joined that fight to try to invalidate or break the grant of rights and get out of the ACC when they please, okay? We talked about it a little bit yesterday. I was listening to Miami Hurricanes athletic director, Dan Radakovich, who was on the Joe Rose show. And I know a lot of people weren't too happy to hear him say this, but he not only fully endorsed the ACC and said Miami is very happy in the ACC, he also said, which is very interesting to me, he doesn't think that grant of rights, which locks every member into the ACC until 2036 because of the TV rights, he doesn't think that can be broken. Let me find the exact quote there. So he was asked about, Joe Rose asked him on 560 WQAM if he was surprised by Clemson filing suit. He says, I really didn't see it coming at this point in time. Almost every school of the ACC has gone to the home office and looked at the documents and just made sure they understood all the different things associated with the grant of rights, television contracts. I was a little surprised that Clemson did that at this point in time, but each of these circumstances are very, very local. Whether you have constituents on campus making a little more noise, that we don't want to be in a circumstance where we're at a disadvantage. He says, I guess Clemson looked at that, said it that this is an important time to lessen exit fees or get rid of the grant of rights. Same thing with Florida State. Now, Radakovich, he brought up a precedent from the Big 12. And yes, the Big 12 has just lost their biggest members, Oklahoma and Texas. They're officially members of the SEC now. Big 12 lost them, but they couldn't break the grant of rights. And the ACC grant of rights was basically directly modeled after, in other words, kind of copied by the Big 12 grant of rights to lock these teams in. And it was 4 years ago when Oklahoma and Texas decided they were leaving, but they weren't able to break the Big 12 grant of rights. They had to wait it out. And then in the final year of it, they were able to buy themselves out 1 year early when it was, more affordable to do so. So Radakovich seems to think that grant of rights is unbreakable. So, okay, you asked me if it's malpractice that Miami is not, trying to do what FSU and Clemson are doing right now. It depends on the circumstances. Now, from where I sit and from where a lot of you sit, who, when we think of the ACC, we think of terrible officiating. We think of competitive imbalance that comes from the TV contracts, because the ACC, they get the short end of the stick compared to the Big Ten and the SEC now. And then, of course, as a Miami fan, let's admit it, we're all a little bit bitter that we've never actually won this conference before. And it's kind of a point of embarrassment for all of us. I get that. But we're not very fond of the Atlantic Coast Conference, that the ACC never really treated Miami like they treat the schools from the Carolinas. It feels like there's a lot of favoritism there, and Miami is always on the short end of the stick from that favoritism. So I would love to get out of the ACC, if nothing else, to, reap the financial benefits that the Power 2 reap. But part of it is the grant of rights thing that we already talked about. Miami has had lawyers look at this. If they don't think it's breakable, maybe they don't want to pay for the millions of dollars of lawyer fees to challenge it. Maybe they'd rather see if Florida State and Clemson can successfully challenge it, because guess what? If one, or obviously both of those teams, find a way out, the conversation completely changes. If Clemson and Florida State find a way out, the precedent is set and the floodgates open, and then Miami and others can act from there. The other part of it is, and we don't talk about enough, is before you fully lean into getting the hell out of the ACC, you better figure out if you've got a nice soft landing somewhere else. And if Miami doesn't currently feel like they would have a bid to the SEC or the Big Ten, then maybe it's not worth making a stink of it right now. Because if you find a way out of the ACC and then your only option is, well, hey, maybe we can join the Big 12, which is a lateral move at best. Like that's not a step up. So maybe that's the situation Miami is in. Maybe they don't feel like they would have a sure bid or an automatic bid to either the Big Ten and the SEC. And in that case, it may not be worth making the stink that they're making right now. So Miami might be taking a wait and see approach. I don't know if they love the ACC as much as they claim they do, but they're clearly waiting for something else to happen first. But that was a great question, Nick, because I know a lot of people get frustrated, when we think about the way Miami talks about the ACC, as if it's a great place to be and if it's some love fest. Tremendous question I want to answer. Who are the team leaders on Miami, and can they replace some of the leaders that just went out the door, whether it be transfer portal, NFL draft, or just run out of eligibility? Who are going to be the team leaders on the Miami Hurricanes football team this year? We'll talk about that and so much more right here on this brand new episode. Happy Friday from Locked On Canes. And we are keeping it locked to Nissan. They spoil me so much with this awesome SUV lineup. This week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any one of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. The Arizona Wildcats can only be described as an armada. This 2-seed is as hardcore as it gets out there, so it's no wonder why they took it to Long Beach State in the first round of the NCAA tournament. They're a favorite picked by many to make a run, and they will face Dayton this weekend with a chance of going to the Sweet 16. So Arizona, shout out to you guys. Folks, take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Thank you so much for making this brand new episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Hey, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making us your first listen and your first watch today. We got more questions from the Locked On Canes insiders. This is a great one. So Dan says, hey, Jimmy Johnson loved Russell Maryland as a leader. his teammates looked up to, and they wanted to please him. Ed Reed was that too. Who is the alpha dog on today's team? Okay, if you're asking for one, alpha dog, and listen, honestly, for most of Miami's storied history, when the Canes were competing for and winning national championships, I think there was always more than one guy. If you're asking me for one guy, I think that Cam Ward has potential to be that, and I think he's already shown me some good signs, but I'll talk about who I think the major leaders are. Like the guys who show me vocal leadership roles. I already mentioned Ward. Jalen Rivers is a big one. Jalen Rivers to me is he's so important, not only to that offensive line. I think the entire team looks up to Rivers, Miami's starting left tackle. Xavier Restrepo is another one. He's very vocal with his teammates, and he's got great relationships with these guys, both sides of the football. And Restrepo obviously leads by example as well, with all of his hard work and, defying his stature. He's a little bit on the smaller side, but he can jump higher than anybody, and he's incredible. Kiko Mauigoa is a big one. I think Wesley Besaint is someone that I'm seeing grow into that sort of a leadership role. And Daryl Porter Jr. Daryl Porter, I think, is another one. And so those are the guys. And I'll add Ruben Bain as well. He doesn't have like that same extroverted personality, but Bain is talkative in his own way, just a little quiet. Like the volume's a little bit lower, but Bain is talkative in his own way, but he is the ultimate lead by example guy, because every one of Ruben's teammates, they respect him. I mean, to see what he did last year as a true freshman, how can you not? And it's important. It's important for all these guys who I consider to be leaders of the team. It's important for all of them to step up and for others to step up around them, because Miami, definitely, they've lost some notable leaders who are on to the NFL or to the next thing, whatever that is, because Cam Kinchins. Cam has been described in the last couple of years as the heart and soul of the team, and he's now on his way to the NFL. Matt Lee, he impressed me so much last year, and Miami's going to get a much different vibe from their new center, because Matt Lee, the volume was at like a 12 with that guy. Zach Carpenter, the volume's at like a 2. He's very quiet, but he does his job on the field, which is the most important thing. But he doesn't have that same sort of rah in your face that Matt. Important leader who moved on. Javion Cohen, another one, was a big time leader who's off to the NFL. So you do have to fill voids in losing these guys. There are other players that I'm going to mention as possible leaders. I haven't had a chance to really get to know a few of these new players yet, the guys who have transferred in. Cam Ward is kind of an exception to that, because Ward has been just so omnipresent and prolific around the program that I have a good idea what Miami's getting there. But I would like to see additional players like CJ Clark, the defensive tackle, who's a 5th or a 6th-year guy. Mish Powell, the defensive back from Washington, who's a 5th or 6th-year guy. I would like to see these guys become big-time leaders, and maybe they're already doing that. I haven't seen it yet, because we're only around the players so much. And again, I think Cam Ward is already moving into that sort of a role. We get a question from Javier, who wants to know, this is a good question. Is Ray Joseph getting any practice time on punt or kick returns? So far, I can only remember being able to watch one special teams drill and seeing who was returning kicks. And I didn't see Ray doing it at that time. So I haven't seen him getting these reps. But the guys that I noticed working on returns were Chris Johnson, who's definitely a guy you want returning kicks and punts because he's fast as lightning, fastest player on the team. Xavier Restrepo, who's been doing that for a long time. Robert Stafford, who I'd like to see in that role. He's very quick as well, the second-year defensive back. Josiah Trader, Carr, a couple of freshman wide receivers, and Robby Washington, who's Mr. Everything. He's playing defensive back. He's playing receiver. He's returning kicks. So those are the guys who I've noticed so far on returns, but it doesn't necessarily mean doesn't necessarily mean Ray's not doing it. Just means I haven't seen it yet. We get a question from Ted, who says, hey, what's going on with Malik Bryant? How come we don't hear about him with the other young linebackers? I'll tell you why. Because Malik Bryant, I think this is a good role for him. He's now working as an edge rusher, and I think that's a perfect fit for him. Jason Taylor did shout out Malik and talked about him when he spoke to the media yesterday as somebody who's performing well and growing out there. And Bryant, he was playing linebacker at Jones High School, but really a pass rushing specialist. He's 6'2", around 230 pounds. He's built solid. And so I think that could be a great role for Malik Bryant. And I'm curious to see how much he gets on the field this year, because this guy was a standout athlete. And, Jones High School in Orlando, one of the bigger powerhouse programs in that area. He played at IMG Academy before he went back to Orlando. So hopefully we see more of that. We get a question from T, who says, have you heard about any meetings between Shannon Dawson and Mike McDaniel? So T has asked me that before. He thinks that, Shannon Dawson could benefit from having a conversation with Mike McDaniel about, route trees and getting receivers in space and spreading the football around and motion, all that eye candy, we call it, all the pre-snap motion. You know what? I'll have to ask. I see Dawson every now and then, and he's super nice and open. I love Shannon Dawson. I'll have to ask him that. The next time I see him, I will ask Shannon Dawson if he's ever had a chance to chat with Mike McDaniel. And listen, I'm also a Miami Dolphin fan. I would like Mike McDaniel to take a meeting with Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal to talk about playing a little more bully ball up front, because I think they can learn from each other. I think Mario and Dawson can learn a little more eye candy and creativity from McDaniel, and where McDaniel, we got to get a Dolphins offense that doesn't just disappear when it's below 60 degrees out there. Get a little toughness, guys. So I think both sides could benefit from one another. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening to the audio version, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, we will talk to you again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.